The divorce drama, a story of betrayal and uncertainty. It all started when my wife returned from a month-long trip with her friends. Initially, I thought it was just a break for her to unwind, reconnect with people outside of our immediate family, and enjoy some time away. But little did I know, that trip would mark the beginning of a massive turning point in our marriage, a turning point I never saw coming. When she walked through the door after her trip, I noticed something was different. It wasn't just the way she greeted me, or the lack of excitement in her voice. There was an air of uncertainty about her, an emotional distance that I couldn't ignore. I had spent the past month trying to keep our lives running smoothly in her absence, and I was eager to reconnect. But as we sat down to talk, something felt off, like a quiet storm brewing just below the surface. That's when she dropped the bombshell. She told me how unhappy she had been in our marriage for a long time. She felt emotionally disconnected, and she no longer saw a future with me. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I never imagined this would happen. We had been together for years, built a life together, and now she was telling me that it was all unraveling. It felt as if the world I had known was crumbling before my eyes. I tried to remain calm, trying to understand what led to this moment. "What happened?" I asked, desperate for some explanation, but she wasn't willing to dive into the specifics. She simply said she felt unfulfilled and that our relationship had turned into more of a routine than something meaningful. Her words, her tone, it wasn't just a fleeting frustration. This was something that had been building for months, maybe even longer. I could feel it. She had been thinking about this decision long before that conversation. Then came the shock that I wasn't prepared for. She suggested that we get a divorce. The word echoed in my mind, reverberating in the silence between us. Divorce? How could this be happening? We had been through so much together, and now, in a moment, it seemed like she was willing to throw it all away. I wasn't ready to give up on us. I wanted to fight for our marriage, but I could see the cold certainty in her eyes. She had already made up her mind. As we discussed what would happen next, the house, our finances, the kids, everything felt surreal. She mentioned to one of our children that she was considering retiring early, moving to Florida, and living by the beach. It felt like she had already envisioned a whole new future without me. The idea of her leaving, of starting a new life while I stayed behind, was more painful than anything I could have anticipated. I didn't understand where this sudden desire to uproot her life came from. Was it just the allure of something new? Or was it something deeper? What cut even deeper was the fact that I couldn't retire for another 13 years. I had worked my entire life under the assumption that we would grow old together, retire together, and enjoy our golden years side by side. But now, it felt like she wanted to do all of that without me. She knew about my financial situation. She knew that I wasn't in a position to retire anytime soon, but it didn't seem to matter to her. She was moving forward with her plans, leaving me behind. The tension between us only deepened in the days that followed. We were still trying to navigate the logistics of our divorce, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already living separate lives. One of the most striking things I noticed was her behavior surrounding her phone. She had always been secretive about it, never leaving it unattended, keeping it close to her at all times. At first, I brushed it off as a habit, but then it became clear. She was hiding something. She slept with it under her pillow, took it with her around the house, and even carried it with her when she went for walks. It was as though she was guarding something, and it was a feeling I couldn't ignore. And then there were the long walks. At first, I didn't think much of them, but over time, they became more frequent. Sometimes, she would disappear for hours, taking off on solitary walks with no explanation. I started asking her where she was going, and she would tell me she just needed time to think, to clear her head. But the more I thought about it, the more suspicious I became. Why was she suddenly spending so much time alone, dressed up, fresh clothes, perfume? It didn't add up. Something was off. My suspicions grew, but I didn't know how to confront her. I didn't want to make accusations without proof. Still, the more we talked about the divorce, the more it became clear. She had already checked out emotionally. I was still holding on to the hope that we could salvage our relationship, but I was beginning to see that she wasn't going to change her mind. She had already made her decision, and no matter how much I tried to convince her otherwise, the walls were closing in around us. The divorce negotiations continued, and the emotional toll was starting to show. She seemed focused on securing her financial future, while I struggled with the idea of losing the house that we had shared for so many years. She wanted her retirement savings, and I wanted to keep the house. It felt like we were negotiating the remnants of a life we once shared. There was no passion left in the discussions, no sense of partnership. We were simply two people trying to untangle the mess of what was once our life together. But what really bothered me was the secrecy surrounding her trips. Over the next month, she made 2 more trips to Florida. She said she was going alone, to visit friends and have some time to herself. I didn't question her at first, but as the trips grew more frequent, I started to feel uneasy. She was vague about the details, about who she was seeing or what she was doing. There was always an air of mystery about her trips. And it wasn't just the trips themselves, it was the secrecy surrounding them. She didn't even tell the kids when she left the second time. It was as if she didn't want anyone to know where she was going or who she was with. That secrecy felt like a betrayal. And then the final straw came. An accidental text message. Our daughter showed me a screenshot of a message that was clearly meant for someone else. The content of the message was intimate, personal, and undeniably meant for another person, someone who wasn't me. My heart sank. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She had been telling me how unhappy she was, how she wanted to leave. And yet here she was, sending intimate messages to someone else. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had felt before. I confronted her about the message, and she denied everything. She claimed it was meant for me, but I knew that wasn't true. I had never received that message. Only our daughter had. The lies, the deceit, it was all too much. It felt like a slap in the face, a cruel joke. How could she be so careless? How could she have been hiding this from me, all while planning her escape? In that moment, I realized that the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, was no longer the same. She had already moved on emotionally, and I was just the one left behind, trying to pick up the pieces. The pain, the anger, and the betrayal weighed heavily on me as I stood there, staring at the phone, trying to make sense of the situation. But there was no making sense of it. I had been lied to, deceived, and left in the dark while she built a new life without me. The divorce was inevitable. It had become clear that we were no longer the couple we once were. The love, the trust, and the connection had all been replaced with secrets, lies, and an unbearable distance. I don't know where our relationship went wrong, but one thing was certain. It would never be the same again. And as I walked away from that conversation, I knew that I had to move on too. Because the person I thought I knew, the person I thought I loved, was no longer there. It all started with a conversation that neither of us had expected to have. I asked her, "Why don't you just go live with this person, whoever he is, unless he's married too? If you're so unhappy with our marriage, why not go be with him?" My voice cracked with frustration, but I was done. I wasn't going to play the fool anymore. I wasn't going to be someone's second choice, someone's backup plan. I wasn't going to sit by while she sorted out her life, especially not if she was already looking for someone else. I had already been to a lawyer earlier that week. She had been adamant about the divorce, and after meeting with the attorney, I felt like there was no turning back. I had made my decision, I was going to see it through. There was a cold, final certainty that settled in my chest. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me. I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine when it was clear to me that it wasn't. I had never expected it to get to this point. It wasn't just one argument, one betrayal. It had been months of little things building up. Her coldness, her distance, and then the Florida trips. The walks she'd go on alone, the secretive messages, the suspicious conversations. I never had hard evidence, not until recently, but it felt like I had been slowly waking up from a fog. Things had changed, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I knew it. I could feel it. But then something strange happened. Just when I had made up my mind, when I had started to see the end of the tunnel and begun the process of moving on, she started to pull back. It was as though the decision she had so confidently made was suddenly slipping away from her. She began questioning everything: our marriage, our future, our life together. For the first time in months, she seemed uncertain. She seemed unsure. She had suggested the divorce, hadn't she? Yet here she was, trying to walk back on it, suddenly hesitant to go through with it. And as much as I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, as much as I could feel the tension in the air when she pulled back, I wasn't ready to give her another chance. I had already made my decision, and it was too late to change it. The trust had been shattered. How could I forgive someone who had been so cold, so distant? How could I let her back in after all that had happened? The idea of going back to the way things were, pretending that everything could be fixed with a simple change of heart, felt impossible. I had already started the process of moving on. I wasn't going to wait around for her to figure it out. If she couldn't make things work with this person in Florida, I wasn't going to sit here as her backup plan. That's not how relationships work. She had to make a choice, and the truth was, I wasn't sure if I even trusted her to make it anymore. But despite everything, despite how clear I felt about my decision, I started to question myself. Was I being too harsh? Was I being unfair? Maybe I was. Maybe I was just hurt, and the anger clouded my judgment. After all, I had loved her for so long. Was I really going to throw it all away over one betrayal? I kept asking myself these questions, wondering if I was making a mistake, wondering if I should at least give her another chance. But then, every time I thought about it, I remembered the secretive walks, the late-night messages, the trips to Florida. It all added up. She had made her choices, and they were not with me. She had chosen someone else, whether physically or emotionally, and I couldn't just overlook that. The hurt and anger from everything that had happened were still raw, and even if she was regretting her actions now, it didn't change what had been done. And then, as if on cue, she started acting cold and distant, as though she wanted me to be the one to fix things. She wanted me to forgive her, to take the first step toward reconciliation. It was as if she was waiting for me to lead the way, to patch up the holes she had made. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't forgive her, not yet. Not after everything that had happened. Not after everything I had been through. She wanted to fix things, but I wasn't sure if I could. The anger and betrayal were too deep, too fresh. I couldn't just let it go. Not when I had worked so hard to make myself strong enough to walk away from her, from the marriage that had started to feel more like a prison than a partnership. I knew people would judge me for this decision. I could already hear them in my head. You're being too harsh. Let it go. Give her a second chance. But I couldn't ignore what I had seen, what I had felt. I wasn't going to ignore the reality of this situation just to make things easier for her or for me. But as she tried to walk back on the decision, I found myself torn. I had made up my mind, but was I really ready to go through with it? Was I ready to sign the papers and let go of the life we had built? I kept thinking about all the good times, all the memories we had shared. I thought about how she had once been the person I had dreamed of spending my life with. But now, Those dreams felt like distant echoes. They felt like lies I had told myself, things I had hoped for that were never really there. It felt like I was standing on the edge of something, looking down into an abyss I wasn't sure I was ready to jump into, but at the same time, it felt like the only way forward. I had to stand my ground, even if it was hard, even if it meant losing her for good. I wasn't being harsh. I was being honest with myself. I had already given this relationship everything I had. I had trusted her, and she had betrayed that trust. The question wasn't whether I was being too harsh. It was whether I could live with myself if I let her back in, knowing what had happened. But then there were those moments when I started to second guess myself. What if I was making a mistake? What if there was still a chance for us? Maybe she had changed. Maybe she regretted what she had done. But even in those moments of doubt, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something had shifted beyond repair. She had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. The pain, the betrayal, the distance, it was all still there, lingering in the corners of my mind. I had to remind myself that this wasn't about her anymore. It was about me, my future, and my peace of mind. If she couldn't offer that to me, then I couldn't keep holding on. I had made my decision. I was going through with the divorce, no matter what. And maybe, just maybe, I would find a way to move on, to heal, and to build a life that didn't involve looking over my shoulder every time she came around. For now, I was done second guessing. I wasn't going to apologize for standing up for myself, for making the choice to walk away, and I wasn't going to let her take advantage of my emotions anymore. I had to move forward. It was the only way to reclaim the life that had been taken from me. As I looked back at everything that had happened, I realized that this was my final step. The decision had been made. There was no going back. And even though it hurt, even though it felt like I was losing everything, I knew deep down that I was doing the right thing for myself. No matter how much she tried to pull me back in, I wasn't going to fall for it. Not this time. This was the end.